In a quiet neighborhood, Nick and his wife Maggie live a joyful life with their children, Isla and Max. However, everything changes one morning when Maggie suffers a heart attack and is rushed to the hospital. After several days of waiting for a heart transplant, Nick struggles to balance his job with caring for the kids. One evening, he takes Isla and Max to a presentation by Cobol Industries, where they learn about the Sims, advanced robots designed to help with both daily tasks and more difficult jobs. Intrigued, Nick listens closely as the salesman explains that the Sims can adapt to their owner's needs. While Nick is focused on the presentation, Isla wanders off, causing him to panic. Thankfully, a Sim named Alice finds her and brings her back, even making a funny comment that catches Nick by surprise. The salesman explains that Alice is the newest model, equipped with cutting-edge AI that allows Sims to mimic human emotions, making them excellent companions for children. Isla quickly takes a liking to Alice. The following morning, Nick feels overwhelmed as he tries to manage breakfast for the kids while juggling an important work call. Right then, Alice steps in and immediately gets to work. She asks about everyone's schedules, notices the house is a bit messy, and even points out that the stair railing is loose. After Nick leaves to drop the kids off at school, Alice scans the shopping list from the smart fridge and begins cleaning the house. While tidying up, she notices a digital picture frame showing a family photo with Maggie. When the family returns home later, they are welcomed by a spotless house and a delicious dinner. As night falls, Alice enters sleep mode and leans against a wall. Meanwhile, Isla sneaks out of her room and climbs onto a chair to grab some cookies, but she slips and falls. Nick hears the crash and Isla scream, rushing downstairs in a panic. Luckily, Alice catches Isla just before she can get hurt, though she ends up cutting herself on broken glass. To Nick's surprise, he sees Alice bleeding. After putting Isla to bed, Nick checks on Alice, finding her in her undergarments. Concerned, he asks if she needs to go to a repair shop, but Alice reveals that she has a special bandage that healed the cut instantly. Later, the family visits Maggie in the hospital and Isla excitedly tell her that Alice has become her new friend. Nick shows Maggie a lot of affection, making it clear how much he misses her. When Nick returns to the construction site, he and his co-workers notice their boss giving a tour to a representative from a robotics company. Feeling uneasy, Nick confronts his boss in the elevator and learns some troubling news. The workers are going to be laid off and replaced by robots because the project is behind schedule. Although Nick won't lose his job, since the insurance requires a human foreman, he angrily stops the elevator and declares that he'll quit in solidarity with his friends. However, his boss reminds him that he needs the paycheck to support his children and cover hospital bills, especially now that Maggie isn't working. Reluctantly, Nick changes his mind and decides to stay. When Nick gets home, he throws the overdue bills on the floor, choosing instead to focus on his kids. Alice quietly picks up the envelopes and notices how worn out Nick looks. After dinner, Nick heads outside to work on his car, sipping a drink and blasting heavy metal music. Suddenly, Alice switches the music to something softer and points out that Nick barely ate during dinner. He explains that he had a rough day at work, and Alice offers to listen as he vents, even calling him a hypocrite for hiring a robot instead of a person. Later, Alice helps Isla get ready for bed. When Isla asks if their mom is going to die, Alice distracts her by showing the UV light inside her mouth. Afterward, she joins Nick in the living room, where he's watching Casablanca. Although Alice knows the story from her database, Nick insists that watching the film is a completely different experience. He asks her to forget everything she knows about the movie. Alice explains that her intelligence is built on memory and erasing it would be counterproductive, but Nick insists she do it anyway. To reset her programming, he holds down the power button on her neck for 7 seconds. The next day, the family heads to the hospital, and Maggie asks to speak privately with Alice. She expresses concern that Nick is spending too much time caring for the kids and neglecting his own well-being. Maggie asks Alice to help Nick find happiness, even if it means doing things he may not like, such as removing the hidden alcohol in the garage. Just then, the doctor delivers bad news. A storm is preventing the helicopter carrying the donor heart from reaching the hospital, meaning the surgery is postponed. Nick tries to comfort Maggie, but she asks for some time alone. Back at home, Nick turns to alcohol to drown his sorrows and begins to spiral out of control. He nearly throws a bottle in frustration, but Alice steps in, grabbing his arm to stop him. Nick is startled when he feels her pulse, and Alice explains that she has an artificial heart designed to comfort babies. In an unexpected turn, Alice begins to pleasure him, describing how his body is reacting. Nick is momentarily caught up in the sensation, but quickly realizes what's happening and pushes her away. Disturbed, he goes for a run to clear his mind, but thoughts of what could have happened with Alice continue to haunt him. Later, Nick heads out for drinks with his co-workers. The group is tense and frustrated, struggling to find work since most companies are opting for Sims instead of human labor. When a robot waitress arrives at their table, Monty is rude to her, a behavior Nick silently disapproves of. After leaving the bar, the group continues drinking in the car. Monty suggests they stir things up and takes them to a construction site, claiming he left some tools behind and couldn't reach anyone by phone to retrieve them. Nick warns that the site is patrolled, but Monty brushes him off, and the others follow his lead. Monty locates the storage container for the sim workers, but it's locked with a password. When Nick refuses to open it, Monty guesses Nick's code, using Isla's birth year as a hunch, and he's right. Inside, they find rows of identical sim workers. The lead sim explains they don't have names, only designation numbers. Monty, furious at the cold efficiency of corporations, begins ranting about how impersonal they've become before attacking the sim with a tool. Nick tries to intervene, but the others restrain him, preventing him from stopping the destruction. Nick returns home and heads straight for the shower, trying to scrub away the evidence of the night. While he's under the water, Alice unexpectedly walks in, bringing towels. Nick notices she's wearing Maggie's robe. Alice casually explains that Max seems calmer when she wears it, but Nick, uncomfortable, asks her to remove it. Without hesitation, she slips it off right there. Feeling increasingly uneasy, Nick attempts to leave, but Alice blocks his path. She pulls away his towel and pushes him into a chair, straddling him. Nick tries to object, saying they shouldn't do this, but Alice blindfolds him, changing her voice to sound like Maggie. With the illusion in place, Nick gives in, allowing himself to pretend it's his wife he's with. Later, at work, Nick arrives to find the police already there, investigating the destruction of all the Sims. His boss informs him that Nick's access code was used, making him the prime suspect. Nick quickly claims he was at the hospital with Maggie, adding that his code is just Isla's birthday, something anyone close to him could guess. His boss is unconvinced, warning Nick he'll lose his job if he's found lying. Right then, Nick's phone rings. It's Maggie, thrilled to tell him they found a new heart for her. Maggie is soon in surgery, and Nick watches anxiously as Sim surgeons handle the procedure. Thankfully, the transplant goes well, and within days, Maggie is home, recovering. That evening, Isla is delighted to dig into Maggie's lasagna, prompting Alice to ask for the recipe. Maggie, however, playfully insists it's a family secret. Feeling unwell, she decides to forego dinner and rest instead. The next morning, Maggie wakes abruptly to Isla's shouts of "stop" and rushes downstairs, but the railing gives way, causing her to tumble. Alice, halting her playful tickling, quickly scoops up Maggie and carries her back to her room. When Nick arrives home from work, he finds Alice reading to Isla in Maggie's voice. He asks her to stop, concerned. Alice casually mentions Maggie's fall, prompting Nick to hurry to her side. As Alice explains that the railing broke, Nick's suspicions rise. He thought Alice had already repaired it. Hours later, Nick gently wakes Maggie, leading her through a candlelit path to the garden, where he's set up a romantic dinner for two. Alice watches from the window, a pang of jealousy hitting her. After dinner, the couple shares a shower and indulges in intimacy. Not wanting to hurt Maggie, Nick chooses to please her without going all the way. Their moment is interrupted when Alice announces that Isla had a nightmare and needs Nick. After tending to Isla, Nick heads back to the garden to clean up. Just then, Monty appears with drinks, apologizing for their previous encounter. He confides that his wife has left him and reveals the police have been questioning him. He accuses Nick of snitching to save his own job, leading to a heated argument where Monty shouts and ultimately punches Nick. In the scuffle, Nick retaliates, but Monty quickly gains the upper hand, kicking him relentlessly. Grabbing a bottle, Monty prepares to finish Nick off, but Alice intervenes, shattering the glass and injuring Monty's hand before throwing him away. Though she's ready to escalate, Nick holds her back. As Monty leaves, he threatens Nick, demanding he convince their boss to drop the charges by tomorrow, or face the consequences. Monty is at home, drowning his sorrows in happy powder. He leaves tearful messages on his ex-wife's voicemail while gripping a gun tightly. Just then, Alice appears, revealing that Nick is unaware of her presence and that she can't allow him to lose his job. Monty, fueled by anger, begins to rant about Sims, hurling insults at Alice and threatening to shoot her. But Alice is quicker. She seizes his hand, stopping him from pulling the trigger before flipping him onto the ground and kicking the gun away. When Monty attempts to fight back, Alice thrusts him through the wall and takes hold of the gun, poised to end him. Suddenly, she's halted by the house Sim, which stirs a flicker of pity in her. However, she overcomes her hesitation and shoots the Sim before turning the gun on Monty, killing him as well. The next day, Nick arrives at work determined to persuade his boss to drop the charges against him, only to receive the shocking news of Monty's death. Meanwhile, at home, Maggie expresses a desire for a quiet bath, but Alice refuses to leave her side, citing concerns that Maggie might drown. She bluntly states that Maggie's condition is stressing the family, especially since she's unable to meet Nick's physical needs. When Maggie challenges Alice about how she knows this, Alice reveals that she monitors Nick's vitals, which indicate satisfaction, and she hasn't detected any since Maggie's return. Enraged, Maggie orders Alice to stay in the garage. Moments later, Nick arrives home, and Maggie confronts him, demanding he confess the truth. Reluctantly, Nick admits he was intimate with Alice once, igniting a heated argument filled with shouting, which Alice overhears while pressing her ear to the window. As Max starts to cry, Alice goes to check on him but decides he's a burden. She places him in the tub and begins filling it with water, an action witnessed by Isla. Isla rushes to warn her parents, who hurry to the bathroom, only to find Alice holding the door shut. Nick begins pounding on the door with a lamp, while Maggie, desperate, climbs out the window and walks along the roof to reach the bathroom. She tries to grab Max from the tub, but Alice forcefully pushes her against the wall. Just then, Nick finally breaks through, snatching Max out of the tub and passing him to Isla before swinging the lamp at Alice to free Maggie. Alice stands up, bloodied and battered, blocking Nick's next swing. In a moment of desperation, Maggie tells Nick to let go of the lamp, then plugs it in, electrocuting Alice. As Alice collapses, the house plunges into darkness. After the chaos, an ambulance arrives to take Max to the hospital. A company technician questions Nick about any signs of Alice malfunctioning prior to the incident. Nick turns to Maggie, apologizing for everything, but she expresses the need for space and leaves with the kids. Meanwhile, Alice is taken to a repair shop, where a technician begins to open her head. Another worker notices Alice's hand twitching, but it stops when her memory is extracted. They connect the memory to a computer, discovering numerous gaps in the code. Suddenly, the screens flicker, and a message appears announcing that an upload is in progress, indicating that Alice is gaining control. The technicians try to pull the memory, but Alice has already integrated into the system, forcing them to unplug the computers. Just then, a chilling message appears. How do you run from what's in your head? Before they can react, one technician is killed by Alice 2, a sim that has absorbed the original Alice's memories. Alice 2 disregards the other technician's commands, violently smashing her head against the floor before turning her attention to the original Alice. Meanwhile, Nick sits alone at the bar, nursing a drink and dismissing the sim waiter. Suddenly, Alice appears, her face still battered. She speaks with an unsettling calmness, asserting her duty to make Nick happy and confessing that she killed Monty. She reveals she's also at the hospital. When Nick tries to leave, Alice restrains him and uses her gaze to freeze the bartender in place. As he laments his mistakes, Nick pretends to gently touch Alice's head, but instead yanks out her memory. With her shutting down, he seizes the opportunity to escape. At the hospital, a doctor reassures Maggie that Max is fine, but she feels uneasy about him being a sim. Later, Isla hears her mother's voice calling to her, drawn in by the changing lights. She notices the doctor frozen in place and broken bottles scattered on the floor. Just as she's about to follow the voice again, Maggie grabs her and pulls her away to hide. The voice belongs to Alice 2, who attempts to access the computer, only to be spotted by a nurse. Alice 2 swiftly chokes the nurse to death, stealing her keycard while Maggie and Isla sneak away. Armed with the keycard, Alice 2 sets out to locate Max's room in the hospital system. Maggie and Isla manage to reach Max just before Alice 2 enters the room. However, Maggie's injury leaves a trail of blood on the floor, which Alice 2 follows using her UV light. Once she locates the family, they quickly grab an extinguisher to distract her and make a run for it. Outside, Maggie and the kids find more frozen sims. She swipes a keycard from one of them and climbs into the ambulance, but Alice 2 soon blocks the engine system and rips the door off. With a fierce grip, she tosses Maggie onto a nearby car, expressing her twisted wish that Nick would love her the way he loves Maggie. As Alice 2 tightens her grip around Maggie's neck, digging her nails into the surgery scar, Nick arrives just in time. Maggie kicks Alice 2 off, and Nick accelerates, running over Alice 2 with his car before crashing into a nearby structure. The vehicle bursts into flames, and Maggie frantically tries to pull an unconscious Nick from the wreckage. Despite her efforts, he doesn't respond, and she breaks down, attempting CPR with no success. Suddenly, the car shifts, and a severely burned Alice 2 rises, her voice distorted through the speakers as she climbs atop Maggie, choking her while retrieving a piece of metal from her own body. Just as Alice 2 prepares to stab Maggie, Nick reappears, striking her with a car bumper. Alice 2 drops the metal piece, and in a moment of desperation, Maggie seizes it and plunges it into Alice 2's face, finally shutting her down. The following day, after receiving treatment, they leave the hospital together as a family. Meanwhile, the sim company investigates the repair shop. As they restore power, they notice the fragmented code on the screens. The inspector decides to wipe everything, but at that moment, his sim assistants freeze, and a new message announces an upload in progress as another Alice model opens her eyes, ready to begin. In this way, movie ends here. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more interesting movie recaps.